when Britain was on the edge and her modern story was set. From that decision, on that day, everything follows. First, there was the war, from the Battle of Britain through Pearl Harbor to the final defeat of Germany and Japan. And so, second, the world was differently shaped. Neither Churchill nor Attlee got quite the Britain they wanted. Instead, they made us. This is one attempt to explain what happened next. The Second World War was such an overwhelming experience for Britain that it's tempting to isolate the country we became afterwards from the pre-war Britain, as if a huge blade fell across the national story. In obvious ways, this is true. The war changed Britain physically and industrially, shattering city centres. It ultimately changed who lived here by encouraging both immigration and emigration. It changed Britain's political climate and our attitude to government. It even changed, through a subsequent jump in the birth rate, relations between the generations. And yet in other ways, post-war Britain was simply a continuation of the Britain of the 30s. Deference and respect for the royal family, belief in the superiority of the white man, a complacent assumption that British manufacturing was still best. All that survived seemingly unaltered through the years of danger. Britain still believed herself to be in her imperial heyday. At the beginning of the Second World War, there were some 200 colonies, dominions and possessions connected to London. The empire ran from the Scottish Highlands to the Antarctic, from the French-speaking villages of Quebec to the mosques of the Middle East. For a comparatively small nation of fewer than 50 million people to have acquired all this was a global absurdity. The empire on which the sun never sets wasn't poetic, it was factual. Imperial feeling still suffused the Britain of the 40s and 50s. Schools displayed the famous red-splattered maps and taught the history of Clive's battles in India and the achievements of missionaries in Africa. The empire was everywhere, from street names and statues to the Indian knickknacks, the Bombay gin, the imperial leather soap. Many post-war trends had started long before the war, and to understand post-war Britain, we have to take a bird's-eye view of an earlier, half-familiar country. One way to do this is to travel with some of the most talented writers who set out to discover their own nation between the wars. H.V. Morton, who went in search of England in a bull-nose Morris car in 1927, was looking for a lost green land. He was a little late. The real Britain was heavily industrialised and urban by then. Morton knew this perfectly well and defended himself by claiming, "The village and the English countryside are the germs of all we are and all we have become." Perhaps, as well as being a little late, he was just in time, for this was before the urbanites had finally finished off the traditions that reached back to the Middle Ages. Looking for quaintness, Morton finds it everywhere, from old gallows left on remote hills to the furry or floral dancers of Cornwall, flint chippers in Norfolk, and even the last bowl turner, making wooden bowls with Anglo-Saxon technology. There are ghosts, cobbles, Roman ruins, ancient pubs serving mahogany-coloured beer, and in general more quirk than any normal person could consume at one sitting. Birmingham, where Morton grew up, is dismissed as that monster. A few years later, another successful writer set out on a tour. John Boynton Priestley was brought up in Bradford. A large, intensely patriotic, pipe-smoking man, Priestley's book had a great influence on how people understood their own country. He was loquaciously political, and when he set out on his English journey, almost a quarter of the British workforce was unemployed. Priestley wanted to rub the nose of southern middle-class Britain in the reality of the other nation. Rattling around in buses and trams, he searched out slums and blighted shipyards, grim factories and desperate mining villages. He found wastelands that made him question whether the whole 19th century industrial revolution had been worth it. Each town looked different, smelt different.